The morning sea lay still, a sheet of glimmering blue stretching endlessly under a soft golden sun. Gentle waves kissed the weathered dock as seagulls circled above, their cries echoing through the salty air. It was a calm morning, almost too calm, the kind of silence that held its breath. At the edge of the naval base, a small patrol boat was being prepared for departure. 5 Navy men moved with quiet precision, dressed in deep blue uniforms that matched the sea behind them. Each man carried the rhythm of routine, checking gauges, securing gear, reviewing coordinates. But underneath it all was a camaraderie only built through years of serving together. There was Lieutenant Dawson, the team leader, a man in his late 30s with a calm face and steady eyes. He rarely spoke more than needed, but when he did, the others listened. Petty Officer Ramos, the boat's engineer, adjusted the fuel line with methodical care. Next to him was Sergeant Blake, the youngest, a sharp-witted New Yorker who often lightened the mood with dry jokes. Beside Blake stood Corporal Reese, a solid, reliable force who never missed a detail. And finally, at the helm, Ensign Tyler, the designated pilot, scanned the horizon as he calibrated the controls, humming softly under his breath. As the men loaded the last of their supplies and prepared for departure, they were watched, silently, intently, from the dock by a pair of keen, intelligent eyes. A German shepherd, broad-shouldered and alert, sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the boat. He wore no leash now, no harness, just a black collar bearing a small metal tag, K9017. His name was Shadow. Shadow had served with these men before. He wasn't an official part of this mission. He wasn't supposed to be on the boat this time. After all, this was a routine patrol. Nothing dangerous, nothing urgent. So Shadow had been left behind on base, expected to rest. But something was wrong. His ears perked with every creak of the ship, his tail still, his breath shallow. A subtle tension had settled into his frame, as if he sensed something the humans could not. His eyes darted toward the hull, then back to the crew. No one noticed him at first, just a dog, sitting patiently at the dock's edge. Then he stood. Without warning, Shadow launched forward, his paws slamming against the concrete. In a blur of muscle and motion, he charged toward the water. Someone called out, startled, but it was too late. With a powerful leap, Shadow dove into the sea. Waves splashed violently as his body hit the water. Then he was gone, only a dark streak cutting through the surface as he swam furiously toward the boat. The soldiers turned, now shouting. Reese leaned over the side, eyes wide. "Is that Shadow?" Dawson rushed to the railing. "What the hell?" Shadow was halfway there already, water streaming off his powerful shoulders as he paddled with frantic determination. He wasn't swimming for fun. This wasn't instinct or training. This was urgency. Pure, unmistakable urgency. Ensign Tyler moved to slow the engine, but it was Ramos who reacted first. "He's trying to tell us something." The moment Shadow reached the side of the boat, Blake threw down a rope. Shadow didn't wait. He clawed up, muscles straining, and launched himself aboard with a dripping thud. He didn't shake off the water. He didn't wag his tail. He sprinted, straight for the pilot's cabin. Crashing through the open doorway, Shadow stopped dead in front of the helm and barked. Loud, urgent, sharp. Again and again. The sound echoed inside the tight space like a warning siren. Tyler stared, stunned. What's gotten into him? The others filed in behind, drenched from Shadow's splash, faces tightening with unease. Dawson knelt, looking the dog in the eyes. "Shadow! What is it?" Shadow snarled low and snapped his gaze to the floor, then back to Dawson. He barked once more, then turned and bounded toward the engine compartment. Blake glanced at Reese. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Reese was already moving. "Yeah, something's wrong, real wrong." The 5 men followed Shadow, hearts pounding now. What had started as a quiet patrol morning was unraveling fast into something darker, something none of them could explain. But one thing was certain. Shadow knew something they didn't, and whatever it was, it couldn't wait. Shadow's bark reverberated through the cramped corridor as the 5 sailors spilled one after another into the engine room. The stench of diesel and hot metal filled their nostrils. The low hum of machinery was suddenly unbearable. Shadow planted himself in front of a bank of exposed pipes and panels, his hackles raised and teeth bared as if daring whatever lurked to show itself. Lieutenant Dawson's pulse thundered in his ears. "Clear this area," he barked. his voice steady despite the adrenaline rising in his chest. He motioned to Petty Officer Ramos. "Ramos, get me a flashlight and a wrench. We need a full inspection." Ramos scrambled, slapping a heavy-duty flashlight into his free hand and twisting the knob on a nearby toolbox. Sparks flew as the metal lid flipped open, and he grabbed a wrench. Blake and Reese fanned out, their boots thudding on the metal grating, checking every pipe joint, every panel seam, every access hatch. Ensign Tyler didn't move from the doorway. His pale fingers trembled against the frame. Finally, he swallowed and stepped forward. "Lieutenant, what if he's right? What if Shadow senses something about to happen?" Dawson's jaw clenched. He knelt beside the dog, gently stroking damp fur. He wouldn't do this unless it was serious. His eyes flicked up at Ramos and Blake. "Check near the aft bulkhead first. That's where that hissing noise was early this morning." Blake sighed, his nerves jangling. On it. He crouched by the aft wall, sweeping the flashlight beam across a maze of cables. Reese hovered behind, hand on his pistol, not because they expected enemy fire, but because in moments like this, anything could happen. The silence stretched until only the hiss of the engines filled the space. Then Blake froze. "Here." Ramos and Dawson converged on the spot. A thin copper tube ran alongside others, but this one ended in a slender, cylindrical device strapped to the bulkhead by duct tape and fishing line. A small digital panel glowed with red numbers, counting down, 047, 14 minutes and change. Ramos gasped. "Holy, that's a timer." Ensign Tyler rushed up, eyes as wide as saucers. "We've been had. Whoever did this rigged the boat." Dawson's calm exterior cracked. He looked from the timer to Shadow, who stood protectively in front of the device, snarling every time someone came too close. "Everyone back up," he ordered sharply. The 5 men obeyed. Reese snapped rubber gloves onto his hands. "I'm no EOD tech, but I know enough to handle a ticking bomb. Let me try to disable it." Dawson swallowed. "Reese, I'm not asking. Do it." Reese flexed his fingers, then crouched before the timer. The metal casing was warping from heat, and faint wisps of smoke curled from the edges of the panel. His forehead glistened with sweat under the harsh glare of the flashlight. Shadow paced, emitting low growls, but stayed watchful. Carefully, Reese detached the fishing line, then wiggled the device from the tape. His breath caught. The timer read 4:12. "That's not much time," he muttered. He unscrewed the back plate, revealing a nest of wires, red, blue, yellow, black, all conflated in a mess. "Which wire?" Blake asked, his voice trembling. Reese blinked. He recalled EOD procedures. There should be a primary trigger and a secondary. The red is usually power, blue is secondary, yellow could be a fail-safe, but sometimes they mix them up. He traced the wires with gloved fingertips. His heartbeat pulsed in his temples. Then he spotted a microcapacitor humming softly, a heat sensor rigged to detect engine temperature spikes. If the boat revved, it would set off the charge. Whoever planted it counted on them running the engines. Ramos knelt beside Reese. "Shut down the auxiliary engine. Keep the main idle low." Tyler darted out, rushing to the helm to cut the auxiliary power switch. The engine's thrum dropped to a whisper. Reese exhaled and lifted his wire strippers. "I'll cut the red wire first. If it doesn't work, we'll try blue." He brought the blades down, severing the red. Sparks hissed, and the timer flickered to 05. Everyone froze. The timer winked off for a split second, then resumed counting. Reese frowned. That was backup power. He cursed under his breath. He yanked the blue wire next, but the device gave a sickly spark. The timer jumped down to 50. Shadow barked, high-pitched and urgent. His hackles rose even higher. Reese's glove crackled. "Damn!" He glanced at Dawson. "I need more time." Dawson bit his lip, sweat beading on his brow. "Reese, hurry." With a deep breath, Reese angled the strippers toward the yellow wire. All 5 sailors held their breath. The tools sliced through insulation. The wire sizzled, then the device went silent. The digital countdown froze at 0:12:47. Silence. Then the room exploded with relieved laughter and expletives. Blake snapped Reese on the back. "You're a miracle worker, man." Reese straightened, adrenaline coursing through him. "That was close." He held up the disarmed device. "Looks like military grade. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Dawson grabbed the timer. "Call it in. Tell command we have a live device, disarmed, but need to inspect for more, and get us a tug or whatever we need to offload this boat." Ensign Tyler grabbed the radio handset. "Roger that. This is Patrol 1-1 requesting EOD team and tug support. We have a 50-foot patrol boat, suspicious package disarmed, timer frozen at 12:07. Shadow is safe. Over." He clicked off, toasting the end of a near-death moment. The thrum of adrenaline slowly receded. Shadow sat down by the bulkhead, panting, ears flopping forward. Corporal Reese knelt and scooped the dog into his arms. Shadow's fur was slick with seawater, but the dog leaned into Reese's chest, eyes half closed. "Good boy," Reese whispered. "You saved us." The lieutenant approached, brushing sand from his sleeve. He crouched beside them and patted Shadow's head gently. "You saved all of us." A distant voice crackled over the radio. "Patrol 1-1, this is command. We read you. EOD team en route. Secure the area and prepare for inspection." "Understood," Tyler replied. He cut the radio and glanced at his crewmates. "We need to seal off the engine room until they arrive." Dawson nodded. "Ramos, fire up auxiliary engine only enough for minimal systems. We need to stay warm until the tug pulls alongside, but no more than that." Ramos got to his feet. "On it." He flipped switches and adjusted gauges. The engines coughed to life softly. Dawson turned to Blake and Tyler. "Go to the deck, keep watch, make sure nobody else comes aboard, and keep an eye on Shadow. He deserves the credit, but we can't risk any tampering." Blake nodded, gesturing for Reese to join them. Reese hesitated, glancing at the disarmed timer still cradled in the lieutenant's hands. He set it gently on a metal crate. "Take care of this, sir." Dawson slipped the device into a protective case. "Once EOD arrives, we'll hand it over. Good work, you guys." The four sailors filed out, leaving Reese with Shadow. Reese knelt and tapped the dog behind the ears. "You're something else, buddy." Shadow licked Reese's hand, then nudged at his chest as if asking to stand. Reese obligingly rose, and they joined the others on deck. The brisk sea breeze slapped their faces. The patrol boat drifted idly, rocking gently on the glassy water. In the distance, they could see the tugboat's silhouette slowly approaching, its spotlight slicing through the early daylight haze. Lieutenant Dawson stood at the rail, hands clasped behind his back. He watched the tugboat, then glanced at his crew. This is exactly why we train so hard. You never know when something seemingly routine will go sideways." Corporal Reese rested an arm on Dawson's shoulder. Shadow nestled firmly in his other arm. This time it was routine turned life or death, but Shadow changed all that. Blake puffed out his chest. "I'm putting a petition in to have him promoted to Petty Officer. K9017, Petty Officer Shadow." Ensign Tyler laughed. "I second that. Imagine the paperwork." The group chuckled, tension melting into relief and pride. Shadow let out a soft bark as if acknowledging the humour. Then he looked out at the horizon, nostrils flaring as he drank in the clean ocean air. Below deck, the disarmed timer lay in its case, an ominous reminder. Reese glanced back toward the engine room hatch. "Do you think there's more?" Dawson's gaze followed his. "Command will sweep the boat inside and out. We'll check every inch. But for now, let's focus on getting home safely." The tugboat drew alongside, its crew waving. Two tug operators tossed a heavy line over. Blake caught it with one hand, Tyler with the other. Together they tied their boat securely. Soon the patrol boat was stable next to the larger vessel. The tug's captain shouted over the murmur of engines, "We heard you had a close call." Dawson stepped forward. "Yes, sir. Suspicious package aboard. Device disarmed." He raised the protective case. "Thanks to this dog and a good man below, we're safe." The tug's captain whistled low. "That's some story. K9? Reese grinned, shaking his head. "He's more than a K9. He's a hero." Shadow barked again, loud and proud. The crew laughed and patted him. Lieutenant Dawson gave a final nod. "All right, let's get to safe harbour, and someone find a way to get this dog a medal." As the tug pulled them slowly toward port, the 5 sailors gathered at the bow of their patrol boat. Shadow sat beside them, head held high, ears pricked. The sun climbed higher, casting glints off the water, and for a moment everything felt right in the world. They had faced an invisible enemy, one that could have ended lives without warning, and survived. A dog's instincts had saved them, and now the tale of Shadow and the 5 Navy men would join the countless stories of bravery on the high seas, proof that sometimes heroes come on 4 legs. The harbour was still in sight when the tugboat crew, after safely anchoring both vessels, began unloading the patrol boat one piece at a time. The bomb squad arrived minutes later, clad in thick protective suits and visors, inspecting the engine room with meticulous care. As the technicians swept over the equipment with metal detectors and sniffer tools, the 5 sailors and Shadow stood to the side, silent but tense. Shadow's gaze never left the patrol boat. His ears twitched with every beep of a detector, every distant metallic clink. Though drenched and weary, he refused to lie down. He remained alert, breathing heavy but steady. "Still wired tight," Reese murmured, glancing at him. "He knows it's not over." One of the bomb techs re-emerged from the boat moments later, his face pale behind the visor. He held up a second device, smaller, dirtier, but unmistakably lethal. "Found another one," the tech announced. Behind the navigation console. Timer was deactivated remotely. Whoever planted these didn't just want damage, they wanted no survivors. Dawson exchanged looks with his crew. "This wasn't random," he said. "Somebody wanted that boat gone, with all of us on it." The implications settled like weight on their shoulders. The cheerful sunlight above now felt cold and sterile. Command quickly ordered a return to base. The patrol boat was quarantined. Shadow and the 5 sailors were transported via secure vehicle back to the naval compound. It was a quiet ride, filled with glances and unsaid thoughts. Shadow laid his head in Blake's lap, his body finally giving in to exhaustion. At the base, they were debriefed for hours. Intelligence officers asked the same questions in different ways. Who had access to the boat? What was the patrol route? Had there been threats recently? None of the men had answers. It was a routine patrol, just another Tuesday. By nightfall, they were released with strict instructions to remain on base until further notice. Each man returned to his barracks, his own silence. But Shadow stayed with Dawson, curled up on a worn mat in the corner of the officers' quarters, his breathing finally slow and deep. At 2:18 a.m., Dawson sat up in bed, staring at the darkness. Across the room, Shadow's eyes were open, glowing faintly in the dim light. They looked at each other, no words, just understanding. The next day dawned with clouds and a chill wind. Despite the emotional weight of the last 24 hours, the team gathered again in the main hangar. Their commanding officer, Captain Ingram, addressed them formally, though the edge in his voice hinted at something deeper. "You were marked," he said bluntly, "but you survived, thanks to instincts and loyalty." His eyes flicked to Shadow, who sat at attention beside Dawson. Ingram continued, "This base was compromised. There will be an investigation. Until then, your unit is grounded, but your story won't be silenced." He turned to a young lieutenant at the podium. She tapped the mic. "You're receiving a temporary commendation. All of you, including the dog." The ceremony was small, but heartfelt. A line of naval personnel watched from the wings as the 5 sailors received commendation pins. Then came Shadow's moment. A petty officer approached with a specially tailored collar, dark leather with a brass plate reading, "Honorary Petty Officer Shadow." Dawson knelt to fit it around his neck. "There, you're one of us now," he said quietly. Shadow looked up at him, tail wagging slowly, eyes soft. Later, the 5 men sat outside the mess hall, steaming cups of coffee in hand. The air was crisp, and the memory of the bomb still clung to them. They weren't laughing yet, but they were talking. "You know," Blake said, "I used to think all that sixth sense stuff in dogs was just folklore. Guess I was wrong." Ramos leaned forward. "It wasn't just sense. He knew. Something about that boat set him off." Reese sipped his coffee. "We never even turned on the engines fully, did we? That bomb might have been set to go off the moment we passed a certain speed." Dawson nodded grimly. "We were seconds from never coming back." Tyler looked down at Shadow, who now dozed under the table. "I still remember the look in his eyes when he jumped in the water. It wasn't panic, it was purpose." They fell silent again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. That afternoon, Shadow was given a full medical exam. Though exhausted and chilled from the sea, he was in remarkable health. The base's veterinarian marveled at his endurance. "You've got a fighter here," she said. You can tell he was trained not just to follow orders, but to protect at all costs. That night, the team received a new assignment. Not a mission, but a task. Review every patrol route taken in the past 3 months. Somewhere someone had tracked their habits, chosen a moment to strike, and nearly succeeded. For hours, the men worked side by side in the operations room, surrounded by satellite maps and route logs. Shadow lay by the door, resting but watchful. At midnight, Reese paused, tapping a line on the map. "Here, we passed this sector twice last week, and 3 times the week before." Blake squinted. "That's near the old lighthouse ruins, isn't it?" Dawson stood behind them, arms folded. Too quiet for commercial traffic, too remote for routine smuggling, but if someone were watching, that'd be a perfect spot. He turned to Shadow. The dog looked up as if sensing the shift in energy. "We're going back," Dawson said softly. "Not now, not tonight, but soon. We need answers." Tyler hesitated. "Even if command says no?" Dawson didn't blink. "They won't." 2 days later they returned, this time with backup. A reconnaissance drone buzzed overhead. A second patrol boat trailed at a distance, but the original 5 and Shadow led the charge, charting a course back to the sector that nearly became their grave. As they neared the coordinates, the mood tightened. The water was darker here, the cliffs jagged like old scars. The lighthouse ruins loomed ahead, half swallowed by sea fog. "Eyes open," Dawson said into the comms. They scanned the shoreline, the cliff base and the narrow beaches. Nothing moved. Then Shadow stood. His nose twitched. He stepped forward, his gaze locked on a cluster of rocks near the waterline. No sound, no motion, just instinct. "Stop the engines," Dawson ordered. "Lower the raft." Moments later, the 5 men and Shadow paddled toward the shore in silence. Shadow led the way, sniffing and circling. Then he froze beside a pile of rocks. Blake swept his flashlight across the stone, a metal casing, partially buried, wires exposed. Another device. Ramos exhaled. They were planning to hit the next patrol too. Reese shook his head. This was going to be a chain. Shadow barked sharply. Behind the rocks, a low figure moved. A man. "Scrambling," Dawson shouted. In a flurry of motion, the sailors surged forward. Tyler and Blake chased the figure through the rocks. Dawson signaled the second boat. Reese drew his sidearm. But it was Shadow who was faster. The German shepherd leapt over the rocks, bounded across a narrow stream, and lunged, bringing the suspect to the ground with a growl that echoed off the cliffs. They converged on the scene, weapons drawn, adrenaline surging. The man, a gaunt, sunburned figure with a satellite phone still warm in his hand, looked up in terror. "I didn't know they'd bring the dog," he muttered. Dawson crouched beside him, eyes cold. "But we did. That's why we're still alive." Shadow stood over the man, eyes steady, ears alert. No longer just a dog, a guardian, a soldier, a hero. Back at the base, the man was processed and turned over to intelligence. He had ties to a local smuggling syndicate with international backing. The bomb plot was part of a larger scheme to disrupt naval patrols in key maritime zones. The team had not just survived, they had uncovered a threat that might have claimed dozens more. That night, as the stars shimmered over the quiet base, the 5 men gathered once more. Shadow lay in the middle of their circle, asleep, his chest rising and falling peacefully. Dawson raised his glass. "To the one who saw it before we did." They toasted in silence. Shadow didn't stir, but a faint flick of his tail told them he knew. Two weeks had passed since the operation at the lighthouse ruins. The base had returned to a rhythm of order and routine, but the air still carried a hum of tension, like a string pulled tight but never released. Patrols resumed under heavier security. All incoming and outgoing vessels were scanned twice, even 3 times. The sailors felt it in their bones. This wasn't just a close call. It was the start of something deeper. But in the midst of the storm, one constant presence held them grounded. Shadow. He had become more than a mascot, more than a canine asset. The 5 men who had been with him that day, the day the boat should have been their coffin, now treated him like family. Everywhere they went, Shadow followed. In the barracks, in briefings, even outside the mess hall, where he'd sit patiently until one of them shared their last bite of breakfast. At first, others at the base simply watched with curiosity. A few chuckled at how attached the team had grown to the dog. But then they started watching him more closely, how he patrolled the perimeter without command, how he responded instinctively to shifts in voice tone, how he would stand guard by a teammate having a hard day. And slowly, the jokes stopped. Respect grew. One rainy morning, Reese sat alone in the team's ready room, fingers wrapped tightly around a photo. It showed the 6 of them, including Shadow, standing by the damaged patrol boat before it was decommissioned. The blast marks were still visible on the hull. Reese stared at the image for a long time. His leg bounced, his breath shallow. His dreams had been dark lately, filled with smoke and flashing red numbers. Shadow nudged the door open and padded inside. He said nothing, of course, but his presence filled the room. He sat beside Reese and leaned his body against the man's leg. Reese smiled faintly, not looking up. "You remember, huh?" His voice was hoarse. "I still smell the smoke sometimes, still hear the ticking." Shadow licked his hand. Reese swallowed. "Yeah, me too." Elsewhere on the base, Lieutenant Dawson was reviewing after-action reports with Captain Ingram. Pages full of analysis and digital recon, but none of it told the full story. Dawson closed the file. "With respect, sir," he said, "we need to make him part of the official K9 roster. He's more than a symbol." Ingram leaned back, considering. "That's unorthodox. Shadow's been off duty since his last handler retired." "He never clocked out," Dawson replied. "He saved 5 men, helped us uncover a network, and he's still here, still alert, still ready." The captain studied him. "You're asking for reassignment approval?" "I'm asking for recognition," Dawson said, "and a new partner, officially." Later that week, paperwork was filed. Shadow was reinstated as an active-duty military working dog, assigned not to one handler but to Unit Bravo 7 as a whole. A ceremony was held in the base courtyard. Shadow stood tall, newly groomed, tail still, as the unit lined up before the flag. The base's chaplain offered a few words. "Heroes come in many forms. Some wear stripes, some wear stars, and some walk on 4 legs, with eyes that see what we cannot." A pin was affixed to Shadow's collar, small, silver, bearing the Navy crest and a single inscription, Guardian. As the unit erupted in cheers, Shadow barked once loudly and the base echoed with pride. In the days that followed, the bond between man and dog grew stronger. Each member of the unit took turns training with Shadow, running drills, hiding contraband for him to find, issuing commands, even riding with him on test patrols. He responded to each one with precision, loyalty, and quiet strength. But something else happened too. The base began changing. Shadow's story spread beyond the compound. Articles were written. A brief clip of him barking at the helm before the bomb was found went viral online. People from across the country sent letters. Schoolchildren drew pictures of the hero dog. Veterans sent in commendations of their own. A retired Marine wrote, "I've seen dogs do impossible things. What yours did saved not only lives, but faith." One morning, the unit received a special delivery, a framed letter from the Secretary of the Navy. It read, "To Shadow for bravery in the face of certain death, for saving the lives of sailors, and for serving with honor above and beyond expectation, you remind us that the greatest guardians need no rank to lead. You are the soul of vigilance." Beneath it, 5 signatures. The men hung it in the ready room. Shadow sniffed it once, then laid down beneath it, as if claiming his space. But not everything was medals and ceremonies. The investigation into the sabotage continued. Intelligence suggested there were still actors embedded within supply lines, men who knew patrol schedules, access codes, and who had helped coordinate the placement of explosives. It was a race against time to find them before they struck again. One night, Tyler was heading back to the barracks when he saw Shadow sitting by the fence, staring into the night. His body was still, but his ears twitched at every faint sound. "You hear something?" Tyler asked quietly. Shadow didn't move. Tyler approached and sat beside him. For a few minutes they sat in silence, just the wind rustling through the fencing. Then, from the woods beyond the fence, a low, unnatural rustle. Shadow stood, his posture shifted, every muscle alert, every sense on edge. Tyler's breath caught. "Okay, what is it, boy?" Shadow took off like lightning. Tyler shouted into his radio as he sprinted after him. "Bravo 7, this is Tyler! We've got movement near the southern perimeter. Shadow's in pursuit." From around the base, floodlights powered on. Security scrambled. Shadow's dark shape darted through the grass like a phantom, weaving between trees and brush. Tyler followed the best he could, heart thudding. Then a cry. A sharp, human cry. When the others arrived, they found Shadow pinning a man to the ground, his uniform half covered by civilian clothes, face bloodied from the scuffle. The man thrashed, cursing in a foreign dialect, but Shadow didn't move. He held him in place, fangs bared, but never biting. Dawson arrived moments later. "Stand down, Shadow!" Shadow released. The man tried to flee, but Dawson tackled him. Security cuffed him and pulled him up. "He was trying to cut through the supply gate," Tyler said. "Shadow heard him before we even knew something was out there." The man turned out to be a former contractor dismissed for suspicious behavior 6 months earlier. He had returned under forged credentials. Maps of the base were found in his bag, along with handwritten notes about boat patrols. "Another one," Blake muttered. "How deep does this go?" Back at the barracks, Shadow was given water and rest. But he didn't sleep. Not that night. He stood by the window, watching the base from the shadows, his breath fogging the glass, his ears never still. Later, Dawson stepped into the room. He knelt beside Shadow, resting a hand on his neck. "You're not just a dog, are you?" he whispered. "You're a sentinel." Shadow turned his head, pressed his nose into Dawson's palm, and closed his eyes. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, for the first time in days, Dawson smiled. It was the smile of a man who knew that as long as Shadow watched over them, they were never truly unprotected. Morning broke gently over the base, casting a soft amber glow across the barracks and training fields. It was the kind of morning that made you believe the world might be at peace for a while. Birds stirred in the trees, wind rustled lightly through flags, and for a few moments time seemed to slow. But inside the Bravo 7 team's quarters, the energy was far from still. The room buzzed with quiet urgency. Each man of the unit was up early, boots laced, gear checked, uniforms crisp. Something was different about today. There was no active threat, no emergency briefing, but every man knew this was a turning point. Shadow was getting decorated. The base had arranged a formal recognition ceremony, not just for show, not just for morale, but because someone at the Pentagon had finally understood the full scope of what the dog had done. Not only had Shadow saved 5 lives, but his actions had prevented further sabotage, exposed internal corruption, and led to the capture of a hostile operative on base soil. They were calling it extraordinary gallantry under silent fire. As the unit walked across the quad, Shadow trotted proudly at their side, his new regulation vest fitted with a Navy insignia patch, clean and polished. He wore no leash. He didn't need one. He walked where they walked. The courtyard was lined with sailors from across the base. Some clapped quietly as the team passed. Others simply stood at attention, not out of obligation, but respect. At the front stage stood Captain Ingram, flanked by high-ranking officers flown in for the occasion. A banner rippled above the platform, honor through loyalty. As Bravo 7 approached, a Navy bugler played a brief fanfare. The sound was solemn, not grand, precisely fitting for a story born from instinct and courage, not medals and speeches. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Ingram began, "we gathered today to recognize a member of our team who serves without question, without command, and without fear. A protector whose actions saved lives, upheld honor, and reminded us that vigilance is not a trait, it is a choice." He turned to Shadow, who stood beside Dawson, unmoving, like a statue carved from strength and purpose. "In recognition of extraordinary service, bravery under threat, and contribution to naval security operations, we present the Navy Commendation for Valor to Petty Officer Shadow." A round of applause erupted, not thunderous but deeply felt. Reese stepped forward to receive the medal. He knelt, clipped it gently to Shadow's vest, then paused, looking into the dog's eyes. "You earned this." Shadow blinked once, then sat down as if to say, "I'm not done yet." Reporters were present. Cameras clicked. Flashbulbs popped, but Shadow paid no mind. His ears stayed perked, his eyes scanning the crowd, as though still on guard, still on duty. After the ceremony, a small reception was held in the mess hall. Civilians from base support, officers, and even a few military families came to offer thanks. Children approached nervously, but Shadow was patient. He let them pet his back, nuzzled their hands. More than once, someone wiped away a tear. A boy no older than 8 approached with a drawing, a crayon sketch of a patrol boat and a dog standing tall at its bow. "This is you," he whispered. Shadow licked the boy's hand once. By evening, the ceremony was over, but its impact lingered. Back at their quarters, the men were unusually quiet. Blake sat on his bunk, flipping through a notepad. Reese cleaned his boots without a word, and Tyler scrolled through a flood of online articles now featuring their story. One headline read, "The Dog That Saved a Fleet." Another, "Navy's Four-Legged Guardian." Dawson entered last, holding a small envelope. "Mail," he said simply, placing it on the table. Ramos picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single note card with neat cursive handwriting. "My brother was on a ship that never came home. If they'd had a shadow, maybe he would have. Thank you for honouring him the way the world forgot. A Gold Star sister." Silence filled the room. Then, gently, Blake stood and placed the card on the wall beside their mission map. "He watches over us. We'll watch over them." Later that night, Dawson sat outside under the stars, legs stretched, back against the steps. Shadow lay beside him, calm, his head resting on Dawson's boot. "You know," Dawson said softly, "you've done more than any of us could repay." Shadow didn't move. "You didn't just save lives. You changed us, made us sharper, made us better." Still no response, just quiet breathing and a sky full of stars. After a long pause, Dawson smiled faintly. "You're not just part of the unit. You're its heart." Shadow finally shifted, nudging his nose against Dawson's side before closing his eyes. As the night deepened, each member of the unit took turns sitting beside him, one by one, some talking, some silent, but all there. Not because it was protocol, not because of the medal, because he had stood when no one else could, and they would never forget that. By the next morning, Bravo 7 was back to routine. Patrols resumed, training exercises continued. The threat of sabotage had been pushed back into the shadows, but one change remained clear. Wherever the unit went, Shadow went too. He no longer needed orders. He had a mission of his own, to guard, to warn, to lead. And every sailor on base knew, if Shadow stood, they listened. If he barked, they moved. If he ran, they followed. Because when the sea returned to silence and danger rose unseen, it wouldn't be the medals or ranks that saved them. It would be the quiet eyes in the dark, and the heartbeat that never stopped listening. A year had passed. 12 full months since the morning Shadow dove into the sea. Since 5 men followed his lead and outran death by mere seconds. Since a silent bark warned of the invisible and instinct triumphed over routine. The patrol boat had long since been dismantled, its scorched remains archived and forgotten in military records. But the story, it lived on, carried in whispers across naval bases, classrooms and late-night news specials. And at the center of that story, still standing tall, was Shadow. The base had changed over the months. Security was tighter, technology sharper, protocols more rigid. New recruits had joined the ranks, fresh faces, fresh eyes, fresh questions. But some things hadn't changed. Bravo 7 still trained together, still moved like clockwork, and wherever they went, Shadow was never far behind. On one crisp morning, with the tide low and the wind clean, Bravo 7 assembled for another routine patrol, a different boat, newer, faster, layered with reinforced hulls and sensor arrays. But the faces on deck were the same: Dawson, Blake, Tyler, Reese, Ramos, and at the helm, tail swaying lightly in the breeze, sat Shadow. He no longer waited for orders to board. He led them. Tyler adjusted the nav screen. "Weather's calm. Should be a smooth ride." Blake grinned. "Yeah? That's what you said the last time." Then a German shepherd jumped on board and hijacked the mission. Shadow gave a soft bark, almost like a laugh. Reese clipped on his vest. "Let's hope today is boring." The boat peeled away from the harbour with quiet grace, slicing through waves like a knife. The morning sun glinted off the water, and for a while all was as it should be. Hours passed. The sea remained silent. It was near midday when they reached a familiar stretch of water, near the cliffs where the old lighthouse once stood, the place where they had found the second bomb, where Shadow had chased down a man hiding in the rocks. The cliffs remained the same, jagged, dark, looming, but something about the air here always made them feel sharper, more awake. Reese stood at the bow, scanning the shoreline. "Still gives me chills." Dawson stepped up beside him. "And still reminds me why we trust the quiet ones." Shadow sat between them, ears perked, tail motionless. From behind them, Blake called out, "We've got a training signal coming in. Sector Bravo 4 wants a check-in." "Copy," Dawson replied. "Let's loop around the cliffs and head that way." The boat curved slowly, hugging the coastline. The water grew choppier near the rocks, but nothing abnormal, until Shadow stood. Suddenly, without sound or reason, he stiffened. His head jerked toward the cliffs. A low growl escaped his throat. Ramos noticed it first. He's doing it again. Everyone stopped. Shadow growled louder, stepping toward the edge of the deck, eyes locked on a thin sliver of shadow between two boulders. Reese tightened his grip on the railing. "What is it, boy?" Dawson moved instantly. "Bring us around. Launch the drone." Within seconds, the small recon drone zipped up into the air. The feed streamed across the monitor on the control panel. It zoomed in on the rock face, cutting through fog and glare. At first, nothing. Then a shimmer. A reflective surface. A lens. Hidden among the rocks, angled toward open sea. "A camera," Blake muttered. "Remote surveillance." Tyler's fingers flew over the keyboard. "Signal's active. Someone's still watching." Dawson's jaw tightened. "Let's shut it down, quietly." They deployed a small skiff. Reese, Blake, and Shadow boarded it, navigating through the narrow passage between cliffs. The boat scraped rocks, waves slapped its sides, but they made it. Once ashore, Shadow leapt ahead, his paws silent on the wet stones. He led them straight to the camera, partially buried, camouflaged under algae and netting. They disabled it in seconds. Nearby, they found a hidden supply cache. Dry packs, batteries, a waterproof case filled with maps and coordinates. Reese picked one up, reading aloud. "These are patrol patterns. Ours." Blake swore under his breath. "They were tracking us again, planning another one." Shadow barked, short and urgent. Blake turned. "He's found something else." A second case. Inside, a small radio transmitter, still warm. Someone had been here. Recently. Shadow snarled, eyes fixed on a trail leading deeper up the cliffside. Reese whispered, "Do we pursue?" Dawson's voice came crackling over comms. "Negative. Return to boat. We'll sweep the area with command. No unnecessary risk." They obeyed, but the message was clear. Even after a year, the threat hadn't disappeared, but neither had the one who could see it first. Back at base, after the sweep, they found boot prints. Too fresh to ignore. Intelligence flagged the area for ongoing surveillance. Command updated protocol, shifting patrol paths again. The system adapted, but the men of Bravo 7 knew it wasn't the protocols keeping them alive. It wasn't the satellite coverage or the reinforced hulls. It was Shadow. Later that evening, the unit gathered near the memorial wall just outside the base chapel. Plaques lined the surface, names of fallen sailors lost at sea. Dawson placed a small metal tag just beneath one of the plaques. It read, "In honor of the one who watched." The team stood in silence, hands behind backs. Shadow sat beside them, gaze steady, breath even. Blake said, "You think he knows?" Reese replied, "He doesn't have to. He remembers." Dawson added, "And he never forgets." That night, Bravo 7 ate dinner together in the barracks, the way they always did after long deployments. Outside, the wind pushed gently against the walls. Somewhere out there in the dark, another boat would ride another wave, and Shadow would be watching. Not for orders, not for praise, but because it was what he was meant to do. The team settled into bunks, lights dimmed, quiet falling like snow. Shadow lay near the door, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. And as sleep claimed the men of Bravo 7, he remained awake. Because heroes don't always sleep. Sometimes they stand guard, even when no one's looking.